There is a moment that feels like a quiet betrayal by reality itself. A moment when something you cannot unsee locks into place. Nothing dramatic happens. No argument, no collapse, no obvious turning point. And yet, from that moment forward, the world no longer feels the same. You realize you are noticing things other people move past effortlessly, patterns they dismiss, motives they rationalize away. And the most unsettling part is not what you see. It is that you cannot stop seeing it. Jung observed this moment again and again in those he studied, not as madness, not as insight to be celebrated, but as a threshold, a psychological point of no return. Before it, perception feels flexible, negotiable, open to reassurance. After it, perception becomes structural, fixed. The individual realizes they're no longer simply living inside experience. They're watching it operate, reading beneath it, detecting intention beneath language, motive beneath gesture, pattern beneath emotion. Once this recognition stabilizes, it does not retreat. Jung documented this state not as pathology, but as consciousness stripped of illusion, awareness without anesthesia. What most people misunderstand is that seeing too much does not initially feel empowering. It feels destabilizing, alienating, like standing in a familiar room and realizing everyone else has agreed not to notice what is plainly there. The individual begins to sense fractures in the social surface, emotional contracts that were never spoken aloud, agreements maintained by silence rather than truth. This capacity is often mislabeled empathy, but Jung was exacting here. It is not simply feeling more, it is perceiving structure, psychological architecture. These individuals notice when kindness has conditions attached, when morality shifts depending on advantage, when loyalty is offered only in exchange for compliance. They hear what is avoided and understand why it remains unspoken. Jung observed that this awareness often emerges early, before the ego fully consolidates. The child senses tension before conflict appears, mood shifts before voices rise, discrepancies between appearance and intention long before language can name them. Over time, this creates an internal distance, a sense of watching life rather than dissolving into it, of standing adjacent to reality instead of submerged within it. At first, the individual attempts adaptation. They explain what they see, they soften truths, they translate insight into language designed to protect others from discomfort. They learn to doubt themselves to preserve connection. Jung documented how this self-doubt becomes a survival strategy. Awareness is treated as a liability rather than an asset. Clarity is disguised to maintain belonging. But what terrified Jung was how consistently this accommodation failed. Perception met denial. Accuracy met discomfort. Truth met quiet hostility. This is where betrayal enters, though rarely in dramatic form. More often it arrives as cumulative invalidation, being told you are imagining things, that you're too intense, too analytical, too sensitive. Jung observed that repeated dismissal does something precise. It does not fracture perception, it sharpens it. Each denial confirms the internal logic. Each contradiction strengthens pattern recognition. Trust in shared reality begins to erode. And yet, instead of collapsing, the psyche adapts. Emotion loosens its grip. Observation moves to the foreground. The individual stops seeking agreement and starts tracking consistency. This is the beginning of shadow integration. What most people misunderstand about the shadow is that it is not cruelty or aggression. It is intelligence that never had permission to exist openly. In these individuals, the shadow contains awareness that disrupted harmony, insight that exposed contradiction, truth that destabilized fragile arrangements. So it was pushed underground. But buried intelligence does not decay. It organizes. It refines itself in silence. It learns restraint before it learns expression. When it resurfaces, it does not arrive as rage. Jung observed something far more unsettling. It returns as composure, as emotional economy, as precision. The individual becomes less reactive and more exact. Emotion becomes information rather than authority. Sensation becomes signal rather than command. This stage often feels like mourning, as if something warm has gone missing. Jung documented individuals who described feeling less expressive, less spontaneous, less alive. But what had diminished was not humanity, it was dependency, the need to be understood, the need to be believed, the need for emotional reciprocity from those invested in distortion. As this dependency dissolves, something steadier replaces it. The nervous system recalibrates. Hypervigilance transforms into alertness. Sensitivity refines into discernment. The empath stops absorbing emotional noise indiscriminately and begins choosing where awareness is placed. This is where power quietly emerges. Not dominance, not control, but authorship. Authorship over response, over engagement, over proximity. Jung observed that individuals at this stage stop explaining themselves. They stop performing emotional labor for clarity that will not be received. Their presence changes. It becomes quieter, heavier, more deliberate. People feel it before they understand it. What unsettles others is not coldness. It is the absence of distortion. Clarity destabilizes pretense. When someone sees without participating, those invested in illusion feel exposed. Jung documented how such individuals are often labeled distant, detached, or arrogant. In reality, they have simply withdrawn from collective self-deception. Shadow integration completes itself through containment, not confrontation. The individual learns to hold what they know without broadcasting it, to observe without correcting, to act only when alignment exists. This restraint is not avoidance, it is mastery. At this stage, regression becomes impossible. Jung was explicit about this internal threshold. Once the psyche reorganizes itself around truth rather than approval, it does not return to illusion. Emotion is no longer suppressed, but integrated. Intelligence is no longer hidden, but embodied. Relationships simplify. Fewer bonds, clearer boundaries. The individual no longer feels compelled to remain accessible to everyone. Compassion remains, but it is precise, directed, sovereign. It does not sacrifice itself to preserve comfort or belonging. What most people misunderstand is that this state is not loneliness. It is freedom from emotional coercion. The individual understands human behavior without needing to rescue it, sees manipulation without needing to confront it, recognizes pattern without announcing it. There is a calm that settles here. Not happiness, not relief, authority. A quiet certainty rooted in self-trust rather than reaction. The individual recognizes that seeing too much was never a flaw. It was preparation, a prolonged initiation into psychological reality, a training in discernment, restraint, and silent strength. Jung observed that individuals who reach this stage stop seeking transformation because transformation has already occurred, quietly, gradually, without witnesses, without applause. They move through the world differently now, less reactive, more exact, less visible, more grounded. They are not waiting to be chosen, not waiting to be understood. not waiting to be healed. They have integrated the shadow and emerged intact. The world continues to perform, deny, and project as it always has. But the individual no longer resists it, nor participates in it. They stand adjacent to it, clear-eyed, unentangled, present. And this, Jung noted, is when the psyche finally rests,